let's move on to our local keynote. So Chris DeLeon is the founder of GameDev, which is a really cool company that gives mentorship to new game designers, which is so cool. He also runs Indicate's Game U workshops and has a lot of public speaking. I'm excited for this. And was also on Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2011. So we're honored to have him today for our kickoff.
Hey, thank you. How's everybody doing? Excellent. So I have somebody who I'm talking to because you got some introduction on me and I do not have one for you. How many of you have made games before of some kind, some scope, some scale? Excellent. Okay, can I hear some people to shout out? I'm curious, like, how long did you spend on those games? Were they short weekend things? Were they other jams? Were they big, long, semester long, year and a half? All of the above. That's what I like to hear. How many numbers of games, so equally counting giant games or small games, we're just going to assume it all comes out in the wash, have you worked on? Just shout out a number. 25, 7, 3, 6. I'm sure for some it's 0. We might not hear some of them, but that's okay too if it is. 5. Nice. Excellent. Okay. So what I actually want to start with is a question of what you're here to build this weekend then. Because you've already built games. You've already built, in many cases, some small games. What are you here to build this weekend? The best game, a small game. A working game. So all of these, I'm going to say, are a means to some other end. Because if it was goal was just to make a game, I mean, it's possible to program a really bad knockoff of Pong in under 6 minutes. And you can just be out of here before I'm done speaking. But instead, I assume you're here for some other reason. So why are you wanting to make a good game, or the perfect game, or a better game? What's your purpose? What are you building? Yes? To learn. Building your skills, in some cases. Some people, maybe, is anyone here building their portfolio? Potentially, right? And even then we can get more specific in terms of who are you trying to impress with your portfolio? Because it's going to be very different if you're trying to impress an HR person with a big company as opposed to a small company, as opposed to an academic. If you're looking to get into research applications of games. And I think that the things that we first think about in our skills and our learning are sometimes like programmers, we assume we want to practice our programming. Artists want to practice our art. But the great thing about game jams is that it puts us all in the same place where there's skills we can practice we can't practice the other 364 days of the year, in terms of our social courage, in terms of bringing up our ideas, working out our disagreements with people. And I think that to me is some of the best stuff that comes from these kind of communities and events, even if at times it might mean the game itself is slightly less finished, slightly less impressive. That again, to me, those games are like the means to the end. Now it depends on what your answer is. Everyone's got a different reason for being here. And in some cases it might be to make, I don't know, who has an idea already in mind? Like, never mind whatever the theme says, like they're going to say a word, right? And you're like, how can I morph this idea I already want to try to apply? Can be honest? Does anybody have something they want to try in the back burner? Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3. Okay, well, I think that's perfectly fine. I think, get what you want out of it. One of my first jams I went to back in 2009, I used the time kind of half to just cut a YouTube video of a game I'd already made. And it was like super not the point. And then I used the other half of the time to like learn Unity for my first time, which like didn't have a lot to show for. I think you threw like a ball that candles on a cake. It was terrible. It's not safe. No one will ever see it again except for like the 12 people in the room. But I'm glad I did because then like I've used Unity for all the years since. And so, figure out what it is you're after. And if it means that the game is sort of secondary to that, that's totally fine. One of the things I'll encourage is that often we're here not just for programming and art and other skills, but design. Who wants to practice their design skills? I'm assuming a reasonable number of people. Yes. So I think this can also conflict with if the pressure is to make a great game, that can kind of scare us out of doing some of the crazy, experimental, weird, ugly stuff. That the beauty of a 24-hour, 48 weekend kind of time scale is you can do stuff that like might wind up in the trash can because there's another weekend next weekend and the weekend after that one. And part of what you're proving to yourself here is that you have the skills to do things very quickly. And that any weekend, even if it's not a global game jam, you know at least how many people are in this room. 40, 50? Do we have a guess?
35.
35. You know at least 34 other human beings now as of this weekend who you can connect with and be like, hey, I've got this thing I want to try and it's not worth spending months on. I'm not hitting up investors for what this is, but let's just do it. And you can do that anytime you want. Most good opportunities in my life came from basically jamming outside of jams. Just little projects I did. They're part of how I got through, part of how I got into the school I did, part of how I landed my first little internship, part of when I discovered I hated corporate game development, big studio stuff, got me out of there into freelance contracts. That was navigated by using just little small games. That's part of how it got me into graduate school was small games I had built. It's how I proposed to my now fiancee Laura, was a small game that none of you will ever play. Probably. But let's say never going to play. And so again, small games I think can serve a very different purpose in our lives than big games, and that can free us up when a lot of people who I meet for training stuff, for clubs and otherwise, can be very self-conscious about, is this, like, is it hacky? Is it bad? Is it wrong? Is there a better approach I can use? And nowhere is it obviously more permissible to write the worst gunk imaginable than like here. Like, this is the place to do that kind of thrashing. And to get it playable, to figure out, is this worth investing more time in? Because oftentimes the way a small game can pay off in your life is that not the actual small game built, but kind of what it leads to. So there's for 7 months, 2007, 2008, I built a little playable gameplay project every night. It's the Interaction Artist series. And out of those, most of it's graveyard of garbage. Just absolute trash, embarrassing. I've removed them from the internet. There's a video kind of summarizing some highlights, and I deliberately did not show several of the more embarrassing, awful things from my early 20s. But those, like 5 of those projects became a seed for one that became an iPad game that did pretty well, one that became an Indicate finalist, one that helped land me some contract work. And those are things that only happen because I throw away lots of stuff. And I think that sometimes when we're doing game design, we feel like the pressure is I have to know what's going to be fun. Like it's the designer's job to be able to decide ahead of time and predict, here's a thing worth doing. And I think more often our job has to be figuring out that answer through testing and thrashing and trying stuff and being wrong and spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, which means writing some hacky, thrashy, throwaway stuff to figure it out. And even at the commercial industry scale, AAA industry, even though it seems like they're not that experimental and they're doing lots of like, shooting Nazis again, great, which is good, but like each time they're doing it, they are experimenting, but when they do it, there's a thing. Who's anybody heard of Cerny method? Cerny method. Different companies have adopted it. Some call it the X slice, or depends on what studio we're talking about. But basically, they internally write hacky, thrashy, throwaway stuff. Things that the professional engineers would fire somebody else over if it was in the main line of the real code. Because the whole objective is figuring out, should we keep this thing? Is this worth going the direction of? Is there something here? And oftentimes the answer is no. Now, the other thing I want to point out about that trashing as design, so a couple cases in my little journey. My first internship, I was put in this little strike team, they called it, or team on Medal of Honor Airborne. It was 180 people. They picked about 10 of us to work on this aspect of the parachuting mechanic, which the game's called Airborne. Like, this was a pretty important piece. And right in the core design, they're like, okay, here's the thing that's going to work about the parachute a certain way. The team of us get it working. It's a mix of designers, engineers, sound people, basically a little game jam inside the company to get this thing working. The producer tries it, hands it to the other producer, executive producer tries it, they kind of scratch their faces. And this has been a few weeks of work for like, about 10 people. And then they're like, all right, we're going to call it right here. We're not doing this. We're ripping that out. We're just canning it. And a lot of us are like terrified, like especially some of the newer ones of like, oh my God, did we screw this up? Did we do it wrong? And they reassured us like, no, this is the process. There was no other way to decide whether or not this was worth investing longer arc energy in than to have tried it and trashed it. Same thing on the next team. So for Boom Blocks, one of our lead designer there, Tomo Moriwaki, he was a creative director from Spider-Man games on PlayStations and such. And he would repeat that like, a lot of designers get the wrong idea that I can figure it out up here. But our brains, as I like to think of it, are terrible emulators. Like if you even try to close your eyes and play Pac-Man, Pong, or Breakout in your mind with your eyes closed, you can't make it 30 seconds without cheating or the game just falling to pieces. We're not built for that. Computers are built for that. And so we get the gunk out, we try it up there, we see how it goes, and we learn from it, we adapt, and we change. But whatever it is that you're here to build, whether it's courage, whether it's technical skill, whether it's art, whether it's your social network, whether it's professional connections, I think it's going to be valuable to figure that as a metric of like, how do we go out of our way to get more out of the weekend than just building a game? Because there's 30,000 people who will be building a game, but you want to make sure you're also building something that for your particular story, your particular spot, is going to be something that you know you're going to get out of it. Because it's also a thing where we talk about building the great game, kind of the nature of any creative medium, poetry, dance, art, novels, whatever. You can do everything right and no one's going to care. There's a huge risk element, right? There's a huge luck factor in if it gets the viral attention, the eyeballs, the polygon write-up, hits the kind of vibe of what's in the atmosphere at the moment. But if you're going into it to do something to improve yourself, it's a bit like if you go to the gym to exercise, not to win the race. You're going to come away from it better than you went. You're going to get practice at what you meant to. You're going to build your network if you go out of your way to do that. You're going to, whatever it is you're here to practice, if you make goal to do it, you're going to do it. And that's probably enough for me for now. I'm not going to be able to be here all weekend, but I will be hanging out afterwards, at least tonight for a bit to chat. So come find me, let's talk and stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to hand off to my extra credit friends.